Number one is his description of the human condition. No one describes your heart and my heart more accurately than the person of Jesus Christ. You know, yesterday I was talking to a young woman who comes from a completely different faith, from a different part of this world. And as she was talking to me, she said to me, I never believed in God because of my faith in the icon that I believed in before. She said, now all of a sudden in following Jesus Christ, I have seen my heart in a way I have never seen it before. It was in the 1980s, during the Cold War, that I had been invited to Warsaw, Poland. It was grim, it was cloudy, it was cold, the Soviet presence already there, very much so, in the early 80s. And I was taken to another city where I was speaking to the Polish gathering. And one day, a man by the medical doctor said to me, Ravi, have you ever been to Auschwitz? I said to him, yes, I've been to some concentration camps, Buchenwald and Dachau. He said, no. This is a death camp. Have you ever been to a death camp? I said, I don't think so. He said, let me take you there. So we drove. Emotionally, I was totally unprepared for what I was going to see. Totally unprepared. Because Buchenwald, Dachau, and all, as much as they show you something, doesn't show you what Auschwitz does. And as I walked in there, from room to room, the only response is pin drop silence. You see the pictures of young boys that have been castrated by Mengele, standing there as twins photographed like this, with skeletons and their skin tied taut around them, vacant, empty eyes. And you look at what the most educated generation then did to humanity. In one room, there was 14,000 pounds of women's hair stashed behind glass. When the women were taken into the gas ovens, they were stripped of their hair, which was then put into sacks and sold in the marketplace to make money out of all of this. 14,000 pounds of that hair still remained behind glass. They were being exterminated in Auschwitz at the rate of 12,000 every day. They'd be stripped naked and taken into the gas rooms, which they were told were actually their showers. And they'd be so tightly packed against each other, flesh to flesh, already just skin and bones. And they would not know what was coming. They were told they were going to get their first shower and all this while. Shaven bald, standing shoulder to shoulder, and the spigots would be turned on. And the gas would start to descend, and somebody would scream, gas. Another 12,000 shoveled out of there. And I remember walking out of there thinking to myself, this is what we are capable of. Even listening to the best music under the world and going to the highest educational systems. But I missed something in that. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the problem of evil is not so much that it's so pervasive and so strong out there, but the fact that it is deep inside your heart and mine too. Viktor Frankl, who served twice in Auschwitz as a prisoner, says this: if we present man with a concept of man which is not true, we may well corrupt him. When we present him as an automaton of human reflexes, as a mind machine, as a bundle of instincts, as a pawns of drives and reactions, as a mere product of heredity and environment, we will feed the nihilism to which he is already prone. I became acquainted with the last stage of corruption in my second concentration camp, Auschwitz. The gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of the theory that man is nothing but the product of heredity and environment, or as the Nazis like to say, of blood and soil. Listen to this statement now. I'm absolutely convinced absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. Not behind the Ministry of Defense in Berlin, but at the desks and the lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. The theory of relativism today is being presented in the highest institutes of our learning, producing a whole generation of young men and women who no longer believe that there are absolutes. That's where it's happening. The early stages of corruption may be behind lecterns. The end stages is the devaluation, the dehumanization, the denigration, and ultimately the desensitization of your conscience and mind. One of my great heroes was a man called Malcolm Muggeridge. In the early days of my conversion, I started to read Muggeridge because he was a brilliant user of language in a way I had never read anybody else. Muggeridge himself was a latecomer to Jesus Christ, possibly the greatest British journalist of the 20th century, a toss-up between him and G.K. Chesterton, both of them who ended up becoming moralist philosophers. I had the privilege of being with Muggeridge just 9 months before he died at his home in England and spending one of the finest afternoons I'd ever spent in my life as he talked of his younger days and his own wanderings, and we talked about the incident I'm now going to mention to you. When he was a young professor of journalism in India, he loved the Indian people. He stepped out of his quarters one morning and went into the river to swim. And as he was swimming at dawn, way out in the distance, he saw the silhouetted figure of a woman getting into the river far away from him. And he was a lustful type of individual. He decided he would make a go for her. Started to swim in her direction, and he said in his heart there was a voice telling him, no, don't, no, don't. But he said, I smothered that voice and swam as hard as I could in her direction. And as I came closer and closer, the woman herself, of course, probably by this point, stunned that someone was invading her privacy, especially as she saw a white man emerge from the waters. And as he shook the water off his face, all he could see was a woman covering herself like that. And he said, I was shocked that I was looking into the face and the body of a woman with leprosy. Her fingers were gone. Her nostrils were gone. Her lips were gone. Her eyes looked almost like a gargoyle peering out of a wall somewhere. And Muggeridge said, I was on the verge of saying, what a horrible, ugly woman. Till he said, I paused and realized, no, I've got this wrong. It wasn't a horrible, ugly woman. It was this horrible, ugly heart with which I was living. Take the whole issue of pornography today, making its billions with supposedly the most beautiful human beings on the face of the earth, stirring up within you the ugliest passions you can ever have. Passions that no human being can ever fulfill. No human being can ever fulfill, because it takes away the possibility of the impact of a person and puts in its place a feeling, a desire as the supreme pursuit to which you go, which no person can ultimately satisfy. That's what the Bible talks about. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Jesus describes your heart and mine perfectly when he says the heart is sinful and desperately wicked above all things. Do you know when the philosopher Nietzsche in 1900, before he died at the age of 54, said God is dead in the 19th century, and then he went on to say a universal madness will break out in the 20th century, and the 20th century will become the bloodiest century in history. He made the pronouncement, both of which took place. He took the first step, and the last 13 years of his life he spent insane. And in the 20th century, we killed more people on the battlefield than the previous 19 put together, and the weapons of warfare are piling up. Take a look at your heart. You know why? On the day you see your heart as desperately wicked in need of a Savior, you could become an answer rather than just another question.